Welcome to the Times Arrow podcast. I'm your host, Alan Guy Wilcox, and I am incredibly delighted to welcome to the show today author and illustrator Kenneth Kraegel. Kenneth's work was brought to my attention through the public library system, and we got a number of his books out and read them to our daughter Fiona. And I was bowled over. I was entranced and thought, wow, we've got a live one here. So, Kenneth Kraegel, thank you for joining us.
Well, you're welcome. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. The book that first through which I became aware of you was this one, Wild Honey from the Moon, which is such a special book. And I wanted to set up this first question by saying, in probably the past 20 years or so, children's literature seems to have had another flowering. And yet, there's also a lot of vanity projects out there and people who think they have a good idea for a children's book. But you are really the genuine article. And this book, Wild Honey from the Moon, especially, really taps into a deep kind of parable, fable, mythic understanding. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about this book and how it came to be, and also just about what formed you as a reader and a writer and an illustrator a little bit.
Sure. Let's see. That book, I was having a hard time coming up with an idea for a story. I think I'd had 2 books out and was still kind of figuring out how to come up with stories. And so I just started drawing. I guess I just made a decision. I'm just going to not worry about that and just start drawing and painting. And so I ended up drawing a winter scene, a winter forest, and then I drew some little houses tucked in there. And that sort of provoked my imagination, like, well, who lives in those houses? And then the rest of the story, so then I kind of had a setting, but the rest of the story came from different pieces. There was, here in Grand Rapids, there's a botanical gardens that's also a sculpture park, and they had this sculpture of this giant horse. I think it's a replica of Michelangelo design, but it's giant, so you can stand under the hoof of one of them, and so so that's kind of how I got the idea for the Mother Shrew riding on top of the horse. And so it was a few things like that where I kind of pieced them together. But then it wasn't until the book was out that I realized that underneath all that was, underneath the whole story was a realization or a admiration of my wife as a mother, because our son had been born a few years earlier, and I just saw this side of my wife that I'd never seen before, and she just seemed to be so kind of instantly aware and aware of my son's needs, and also what's the way to say it? She just had this intuition and this kind of self-sacrificing attitude at the time that I was really struggling with this interruption in my life and that kind of thing. So that was ultimately where that came from. So
that's beautiful, because, and for readers who aren't familiar, and I think that whether or not you're a parent, this book taps into something very deep and very familiar in a lovingly strange and bizarre way, in a fanciful way. And Mother Shrew, whose son Hugo is ill at the beginning of the book, not only goes to the ends of the earth, but in fact all the way to the moon. So a mother's dedication is surely on display here. Let me ask you this, though. Because I think also a trend that I see more and more of are children's books that are used to explain the world to young children, to explain this is how democracy works, or this is how here's intro to physics for a 2-year-old, right? And this explains, or maybe not explains, but showcases some kind of, I'm tempted to say, eternal human values, but it doesn't. It presents us with a non-traditional, supernatural, an imaginative, highly imaginative view of the world. So when you had this project complete, was there ever any sense of, oh well, bees don't exist on the moon, how are you how is this going to fly in the marketplace, or was it treated differently? I mean,
You mean like how did the what kind of a response did the book get? Is that what you're asking, or?
well, I guess I'm assuming that if there are any readers like me out there, that the reception to the book was pretty wonderful. But I suppose even from your publisher, was there a sense that this was kind of going against the grain, or was it just kind of warmly received immediately, or how did that play?
Well, my publisher is they're very great at just they're the kind of publisher that publishes what they like and doesn't have as much regard for the market. That's how I understand them. It's Candlewick Press, and my editor is definitely that way. So I was in good company that way. I do think overall there is the more didactic kind of stories or books do sell well, and I think that. I think a lot of people, when they're thinking of books for kids, they want to teach a lesson, and I think that's I don't really know what to think about that, but it's not the way I like to do it. It's I like to do it a more I just like to focus on the story and what seems natural to the story, and what comes out afterwards is sort of news to me. Like it's not until the story is finished that I actually realize what the story is about. But maybe that's not answering your question exactly. I
No,
think that
I love that. Yeah.
I think overall the book is it's a longer book, and so it didn't it's not the typical format, and so it was sort of a little quirky that way too. But it did fine. People liked it, so it got good reviews. So yeah.
uh, as it should, and maybe that's an interesting way to think of, because in a way, when you were describing that process, it sounded a little to me also like a musician who pursues kind of tones and ambience and ideas, and then out of that seedbed emerges character and story. um, the book is so, I mean, and I like to talk about the other ones as well. This book is so lovingly made, and there are also borders around a lot of the illustrations, and which has rich content reflective of where you are in the story. So in an age where things can be quickly slapped together, especially visually these days, it's very touching to have a deep and rich experience with the book, even on that level. And so it's something that it's nice to get into a child's hands. But let me ask you this question, Kenneth. So, yeah, not all of your books are similar types of books. You've got very different types of books. And so I guess one question is, how do you know when you've got a hot potato? How do you know when you have something on your hands here? And to kind of piggyback onto that question, do these things emerge kind of in a naturalistic way, or do you have a sense for your career before you start moving into it? I mean, I think I see in your materials that you're described as kind of a self-taught illustrator. How did this amazing career of yours, I mean, and these amazing works, how did it all come about?
Well, when I was in high school, I really wanted to be a rock star, and so I spent a lot of time in my room trying to play the guitar, and in the living room playing the piano, and my family was unanimous in saying I should shut up. So it slowly dawned on me that what music wasn't a gift of mine, and but I really love music, and so I started listening to music while I was, but I needed to do something, so I started kind of drawing and painting, and I really loved doing that, and so that kind of continued on even after college, and at the same time from high school onward, I was also writing short stories and imagining longer, novels or that kind of thing. So eventually those two came together, and I started putting the words and the pictures together and found that to be a really exciting format, because it's like a mini movie or a mini play. You can do so much all by yourself. So that was something I wanted to do, but I was initially discouraged, just because it's so hard to break into the publishing world, and I was pretty naive about what that would take. So I gave it up for a while. I was still creative, still making art, but I decided I wanted to be an organic vegetable farmer. So I did some internships, and eventually had a farm in Indiana, and then realized that growing vegetables was great, but you have to have a way to sell them, and I just have no interest in marketing, and that's really that was really the skill set that was needed. So eventually I kind of exited through a few little other jobs. Then I decided I wasn't going to do that. That I did really want to do the picture book thing, and so then I took it seriously and went 100% at it, and sort of bit by bit learned both the business side and the creative side of how things work, and so now I feel like I'm at a point where I have kind of an understanding of my creative process, of this sort of loose area in my brain where I just let things be, and they eventually settle down into something that's workable, if that makes any sense.
It does, and that's a very interesting story. And organic vegetable farming is close to my heart as well. So it's what I'm getting from that is this, spirit of cultivation, which I think somehow spiritively is present in your work. Funny question: were there any works as you were going from this, to use your word, kind of a naive earlier phase where you were still creating the artwork but didn't know quite what the route was to get it into publication? Were there any works that you had worked on that haven't been published yet, or that weren't published along the way, that you think you might revisit? I'm not asking you to spill the beans too much, but I'm just curious about that early part of your bookmaking history.
Yeah, there was the first book was it was it was kind of realized in Wild Honey from the Moon. So the first one was about a brother and sister who get stuck in a tree, and the moon sees them. So it had this whole moon piece to it, and then it's a different story, but it kind of came to fruition in Wild Honey from the Moon. And then there've been a few others where I've been that I've taken bits and pieces from, or that may still come to play. But what I wasn't doing then was I wasn't doing as much revision as I do now. So then I was more just kind of feeling like it was good as it was, and now I continue to kind of critique and improve, and kind of whittle away at a story until I feel like it's really coherent to minds other than my own.
Something that comes up time and again in the conversations that we have here at Times Arrow is the idea that different authors, because of their personal history or their inner makeup or just their where they are in life, they require different books as nourishment. at different times. They need to dip into one little branch of literature for a while, or it could be music or another field that may not be readily apparent to readers, and we might assume, oh, this really reminds me of X, Y, or Z, when in fact the author had needed or sought different inputs in order to get the cauldron brewing just right. So, question for you would be, as you're, clearly, I can't imagine a world in which you haven't read deeply and widely in the history of children's literature, but any kind of surprising reading elements that you find helpful or interesting, or get you to where you need to be in order to produce the kind of work that you do?
Uh, well, the probably book that I love the most is The Wind in the Willows,
Mm.
and that
Another
is,
Kenneth.
yeah, that's right, yeah, um, and it's kind of the language in it is um, not current. It's not contemporary, but it's so beautiful. And I read that book every year, every winter. I read that book, and so that one's been special to me for probably more than a decade now. Um, Before that, when I was a teenager, I found the Narnia Chronicles and the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and those were the books that kind of opened me up to an imaginary world, and I think they kind of um, set the stage for what was to come in a lot of ways. So I
Hmm.
guess I kind of like those Edwardian, Victorian, British children's authors. um,
Right, and I think something that you mentioned in just now, but also in the context of those authors, which may seem obvious, but I think is underrated in an important way, is this element of beauty. And you described "The Wind in the Willows" by Kenneth Grahame as a beautiful work, and I think that we can't necessarily underrate how important that is to experience as a young reader, and to the treat it is to get to experience that as a parent reading along with your child, is just simply that, the experience of beauty. And I think, I want to say, spoiler alert about Wild Honey from the Moon, but Mother Shrew does get to the moon, in fact, and when she comes back down on this moonbeam, it's really quite breathtaking. It's a beautiful moment, and taps into something profound in a way that I think those other works tend to do as well. Um, that may speak to a point we were maybe getting at earlier when you described other didactic children's literature as having a kind of utilitarian, impulse that this book is meant to produce X result in a child, and that's a very different type of project than creating kind of a dreamlike web for a child to kind of get caught up in. Um, okay, so you mentioned that you're joining us from the great state of Michigan, and that you live in Grand Rapids, but you've also spent time farming in Indiana. Are you open to telling us a little bit about how you came to live in Grand Rapids, and what it's like? The botanical garden sounds amazing.
yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, well, we moved here from for a job. My wife took a job here, and we'd lived all over the place. We lived in Wyoming, and then all around the Great Lakes. So we lived in Chicago, and so right on Lake Michigan, and then Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio. So we were near the Great Lakes for all of that. But then we also lived in Uganda for 6 months, where my
Wow.
wife did research. She's a psychologist, and she did her dissertation research there. So yeah, so we moved around a lot, and but Michigan is great. We're in West Michigan, which is right along Lake Michigan. There's a growing zone that's a lot warmer. It's tempered by the um, by the big lake, and so there's a lot of fruit, all kinds of fruit that grow up and down the coast of Lake Michigan, which is great. So
Mm.
for breakfast this morning, I had on top of my cereal strawberries and blueberries. So that's one of the high points of living out here.
Can't beat it.
Yeah,
That's beautiful. That makes we should all go visit Grand Rapids
yeah.
and eat
There's a
strawberries and
lot of
blueberries.
breweries here too. So if you like beer, this is a
Hmm.
place to be as well. So fruit and
Okay,
beer.
it's starting. The picture is starting to make sense now about why Grand Rapids is such an alluring and creative place. Um, so on your website, which everyone should go check out, and we'll leave a link to it in the show notes below. There's a couple of really lovely pictures of you in what I presume is your working studio. It seems to have almost a little bit of a greenhouse or a sunroomy type feel to it. Lots of light. Can you describe a little bit like what it's like where you work, and also a little bit about maybe what your work habits are? Just would love to
Yeah.
hear about that.
Yep. So it's a studio that I built in our basement, and it's the first studio I've had that was uh, built with that in mind, and yeah, it's I spend lots of hours down here. I alternate. I have a desk and then a drawing board, and I alternate between the two. And when I write usually with images and pictures kind of together. So um, I'll write a story, or I'll have an initial idea of a story, and I might sketch it down, and then I'll make three finished illustrations from that basic idea, and then I have some pictures to look at when I'm writing the story. So, and then
Mm.
I'm also sketching. So it's a lot of back and forth, back and forth. Um, and so, well, I guess the easy way to say what my day's like is right now I'm revising some sketches for for the um, book that I'm working on, and so this is painful work, revising sketches. I'm not like I said, I'm not a trained artist, and so drawing is I've been studying a lot of other illustrators and like trying to uh, figure out what it is that I want to accomplish. Um, but I spend most of the day sketching and resketching, and then I scan it and put it into um, InDesign, and where I can add words to it. Um, and then eventually, in another week or two, I'll send that off to my art director, and she and my editor will look over it, and then like maybe a little more back and forth, and then I'll start making the finished illustrations. So that'll take about 6 months to make the finished illustrations. It's one of my favorite parts. I think I have three things I really love. One is making the finished art, and the second is when a story is evolving at the beginning. That gets really exciting because it just keeps opening up and taking different turns. That's a really exciting time. And then the third thing I love doing is visiting schools or libraries, which I get to do a fair amount, and that's really fun too. I love traveling all over to different places, um, into cities, and then way out into the rural areas. It's just every school is a little bit different, and it's really exciting to get a window into all these different lives that people live. So, um,
Hmm.
so
Well,
yeah,
we'll have
those are
to
the
get you.
that would be
Well, that
great.
that sounds. It sounds like a yeah. We're gonna lobby to bring you to the Mohawk Valley of Central New York State, where I am now. So, I mean, I think what immediately leaps out from that is how interesting and varied the line of work actually is, and that it sounds like there's in addition to kind of working and crafting every day, there's kind of a period of where you're kind of listening to as the story emerges and trying to see which path is most appropriate to take, and then you get to do all the finishing of the this artwork, which is again highly imaginative, very fun, and you know we see Mother Shrew, even just pictured on the cover with this red umbrella, and it just kind of goes straight into my cortex. It just kind of goes way back and rings a little bell back in there, summoning me into a different world. So um, I'm sure that you can't preview too much of your next work, and it's in process right now. But maybe you could give us a little sense for. So, is that something we could potentially expect next year, or?
Let's see. Well, I have the the book that came out last October was called Mushroom Lullaby. It's a bedtime book,
Yes.
and then the next book, there's going to be three lullaby books, and the next book will be called Mermaid Lullaby. And then the book that I'm working on now is a standalone. That one's a little harder to describe. And then there will be the third lullaby book. So those are the projects that are I'm working on right now. Um, I kind of
Fabulous.
watching my son read books. I kind of realized that uh, it can be handy to have. My books are all pretty different, and so I thought with these lullaby books, maybe if I make a few that are very similar, like different enough, but the same theme, that readers would have, if they liked one, then they could go to the other and the other, which it seems like a lot of books are written in series right now, and I think that's wise, because if you're not sure what to read next, it's pretty easy to just grab that book that's by the same author and in the same series. So
Certainly, and whereas Wild Honey from the Moon is kind of an adventure story, and it's got chapters, and while it's not a lengthy chapter book, it's something that, depending on how, if you're reading at bedtime, depending on how tired or sleepy your child or you the parent are, you might break it up in two nights, or have it be the only thing that you read for an evening. Whereas Mushroom Lullaby is a very sweet kind of, I'm tempted to say nightcap, but not quite appropriate for kids, but you get my mean. It's a nice little after dinner mint.
right,
That so I think we'd seek out in more lullabies. That sounds, Mermaid Lullaby sounds terrific. So
yeah. Well, thanks. There's something you mentioned earlier that I thought was well said when you were talking about beauty, like as a focus in children's books, and I think I think it's well said. It resonates with me because that is the direction that I'm going in. That's what I love about any work of art, and that's it, with those with Tolkien and Lewis and Kenneth Graham. With those books, when I that's what I encountered in those that was so eye opening to me was beauty, and beauty's a hard thing. You can't. It's a hard thing to get at, but when I experienced that was so exciting, and I think that's what it was that planted that seed way down, that kind of grew, and that gave me the ambition to make books myself. I wanted to make music, but that wasn't an option. But so the making the art, I think I'm trying to get there myself to beauty. It's like a quest kind of, and I just wanted to mention that because that's when you said that, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. So
that really resonates with me, and I think that when I listen to music, uh, especially music without lyrics, although it could have lyrics, and I'm sure, like many, we all listen to widely to lots of different types of music, but the patternings that we encounter in music can feel right without necessarily making sense. And I think that is also an element of that is also present in your work, where I couldn't have pictured this as the logical next step, but it still feels right and makes sense. And so that's something that's I hope that mystery is never cleared up for me. I hope that I can continue to encounter it without having to worry about explaining it. But Kenneth Kraegel, this is the first time that Times Arrow has ever gotten the pleasure to interview a children's book author illustrator. So thank you. You've set the bar very high, and we just want to take this opportunity to celebrate your work. And it's great to it's great to formally meet you. And I hope that when the next book comes out, that we can maybe sit down and have another conversation.
Yeah, that would be great. I have to say I was a little intimidated when I saw your other guests. Thought, I don't know if I can be that articulate, but I appreciate your interest.